Hey, how we doing out there, guys? So this is going to be my first podcast slash video, kind of in a new vein. So what I'm going to be kind of doing, I'm going to keep up with the stuff going on in Ukraine and things like that. Obviously, if you're a war nut, you kind of have to, keep your ear to the ground on the modern large scale war that's going on. But what I'm going to do here for a while is I'm going to put out videos like I just did, and then I'll kind of include it with this as well. So videos describing some form of battle tactic or basic. Some of them won't be super basic, but the basic battle tactics. So I've done videos on small unit tactics. These will be battle tactics. So kind of more to think about, like at the unit level. And kind of actual battle strategies, battle tactics, and then I'm going to kind of offer a longer form video where I'm going to pick a battle from history that is a good example of that particular battle tactic, and then kind of talk my way through it, kind of talk our way through it. Just because I think, using like something as simple as my marker board and, like my magnets, I think is really like that stuff is incredibly useful for understanding the basics of stuff, but also you need to see what it actually looks like in real life. If nothing else, the distances are incredibly great. And so kind of, being able to understand that. So the first video that I just put out, so I talked about what's kind of more of a concept or kind of a directive, which is the idea of find, fix, flank, finish, or find, fix, and finish, which is, it's very, it's common military, kind of vernacular, but it's incredibly important stuff to actually kind of, really sort of sit back and think about what it means. Because we kind of always, I think one mistake that's very easy to make when it comes to, battles is thinking that like battles were always going to happen, or that the reason they fought is because both sides agreed to basically fight in this particular area, which is not true. Those are what we call pitched battles. So a pitched battle is when both enemies have the option to fight or to not fight, and they basically both choose to deploy and fight. So that's what the term pitched battle means. Whereas much of, actual reality, is it's trying to, in some way corner an enemy or to attack something of significant value for them where they're forced to, kind of, come and actually confront you. So you have a chance to, sort of defeat them. Some really good examples that, like Borodino in 1812 and Napoleon's campaign in Russia is a very good example, and I considered using that example, but I just decided not to because I'm not as good of a Napoleonic warfare era guy as I am some other eras. But that's a very good campaign, to kind of talk about, somebody that is using kind of a Fabian strategy, which I'll talk about here, but also, Napoleon's entire plan with that was basically to catch the Russian army in front of Moscow somewhere, destroy it, and then use that as a kind of a sort of a primer or sort of a motivation to get the kind of peace settlement that he wanted. But what I'm going to use to talk about kind of the very iconic or the very fundamental ideas of find, fix, finish. We're going to talk about the campaigns, at least some of the campaign in the Second Punic War in Italy. Obviously, so our main antagonist or protagonist, depending on one's affiliation here, is going to be Hannibal Barca. So Hannibal Barca, Carthaginian, represents one of the three, like, absolute genius, if you're building around a Mount Rushmore of commanders of the ancient world. It's Alexander the Great, Scipio Africanus, and it's Hannibal Barca in no particular order whatsoever. So Hannibal Barca, absolute military genius. And one thing I think that's interesting with the Hannibal Barcas, the Alexander the Greats, the Scipio Africanus, those types of characters, like people who I don't know even the best way to say it. It's almost like they're the guys who would be the best poker players. They would be the guys who go to the bar and pick up your chick, and they would be the football coach that picks the right plays at the right time. So they're people who just have like an unbelievable feel for the area, the circumstances, the battlefield, the terrain, and everything. They have an unbelievable feel for their opponent's commander. So basically, their counterpart in the opposing army, and they just seem to make critical, correct decisions at critical and correct times. So what we're going to talk about here, so kind of, in the idea of finding, fixing, flanking, finishing. So this will be kind of a, fairly, I'm not going to, get into, like an unbelievable, like 3-hour freaking spiel on all of this stuff. But so what we'll kind of talk about is, so Hannibal crosses the Alps in 218 BC. They don't really know where he crossed the Alps, but I don't know, it's basically somewhere over here. So anyways, so in late 218, so he fights a couple battles. One was at like the Ticinius River there, which was kind of, so this, and it's also, it needs to be said that like this is what was called Cisalpine Gaul at the time. So like all of these are like Gallic tribes that live up here, which basically obviously have no allegiance to Rome. Some of them were, roughly allied with Rome, or kind of, kind of a little bit, lukewarm or neutral on that. Some of them were openly hostile. So what we think of as like modern Italy took, centuries or like, millennia to actually fully establish. And that will become part of, Hannibal's, kind of his overarching strategy here. So Hannibal fights this, engagement at the Ticinius River. And basically this convinces a lot of Gallic tribes to join him. So he has a primarily mercenary force. He has some Carthaginians, he has some Numidian cavalry, some elephants, and then lots of Gallic and Spanish or Iberian mercenaries. So then in in December of in December of 218 BC, he meets the first, legitimate large-scale Roman army at what's called the Battle of the Trebia. So the Trebia River, it's kind of in this watershed here in northern Italy, and so the exactly specific location isn't known, but it's kind of in this floodplain watershed area there. So so the Romans are being led by Sempronius Longus, and kind of the famous story with this is that Hannibal basically he knows his man. So so the Roman command structure, they kind of have like two consuls, and they kind of are flip-flop in command. So one of them commands this day, and one of them commands that day. It's kind of supposed to be a check on power, but and honestly, it wasn't really that uncommon, in the ancient world. The Spartans famously had, two kings. And, so basically, so what Hannibal does is he becomes aware of, through, spies and other such things, becomes aware of when Sempronius is in command. He's much more aggressive, much more, kind of reckless commander. So Hannibal kind of sets a little bit of an ambush, arrays his army. Basically, they kind of, go over and start messing with the Roman camp in the morning. And so obviously it's December, and, it doesn't take a genius to look and see how close you are to the Alps here to know that it's freaking cold. So it's cold out, and he kind of just goads the Romans into attacking him, and they finally do. So they ford across the Trebia, so this river. So obviously it's December, it's winter, they're soaking wet now. They attack the Carthaginians. So what Hannibal had done is he had, left some form of like kind of ambush or sort of hidden force, I imagine kind of in a depression in the ground or something to that extent. And, at the, kind of the crucial moment, they attack the, the flanks, the rear of the Romans and basically deal them a heavy defeat. So the Romans take, about 20,000, casualties and are significantly defeated here. So the Romans basically get defeated, and so then they kind of come streaming back to the south, closer towards Rome and all that. And so Hannibal spends this time kind of, consolidating, dealing with, issues he's got up here, as far as like trying to get allied tribes, the Samnites and other such, tribes. He keeps trying to basically, so a lot of the Italian, what we think of today is just like regions or kind of subsets of Italy, we're obviously like separate, tribal groups or tribe groups, so you think about like the Samnites and the Etruscans and the Romans and the Italians, like those were, the Piedmontese and stuff, like those were different peoples. And some of them had only fairly recently been, integrated or conquered or whatever into the actual Roman Empire. And so his goal was basically to be like, hey, instead of being with the Roman Empire, you can be with the Carthaginian Empire. And so that was kind of his main goal. So then as Hannibal moves south, so obviously, so that was the very end of 218 BC. So we get into 217. So Hannibal ends up down this area around Lake Trasimene. So he kind of attacks a couple of places, kind of in the area, and he basically goads the Roman commander Flaminius into like a too hasty pursuit of him, and he leads him into an ambush. And we don't know like the exactly specific location, but basically what it was, I'm just going to like pick random spots. But basically what it was he'd essentially, got the Romans strung out on the road. They'd kind of used a little bit of trickery, and they'd had people go ahead and plant, like campfires and things way ahead to make the Romans think that the Carthaginians were further ahead of them than they were. And then this, at this time, so we're in June of 217. So, which is still like, late spring, very early summer. So it'd be very foggy, misty in the morning. So the Carthaginians are basically hiding in the hills and things like that. The Romans don't see them. The Carthaginians basically spring on them and just absolutely slaughter them and kill 25,000 or inflict, 25,000 casualties between dead and captured and things like that. And this was absolutely like huge deal. So the Romans that survive, which isn't very many of them, the Romans that survive basically start streaming back towards Rome, panicking because they think, hey, he's basically just going to turn and march straight on Rome down here. And so the Romans elect a new dictator, and this will kind of get us to the specific point here, a guy by the name of Fabius Maximus. So this is obviously 217. The Romans elect Fabius, and so Fabius decides, and history would prove him correct, but at the time they absolutely hated him. But so he kind of basically decided, he's like, listen, like Hannibal is good at fighting people in open battles. Let's just not fight him in open battles whatsoever. So basically, the Carthaginians essentially move south because they're basically trying to get down into southern Italy, which were areas only there's a lot of the cities, kind of city-state areas over here are Greek cities, because obviously we know about the Greeks having been down here, and had only very recently been taken over by the Roman, and kind of assimilated into the empire here. So his goal is basically to move himself down into southeastern Italy, try to get some allied tribes, get his supplies, things like that, and also this gives him access, potentially, like from a naval standpoint to be able to actually, get to get reinforcements or to be back in contact with Carthage itself. So the Romans elect Fabius Maximus as their dictator. So Fabius basically comes out, and Fabius basically decides, you know what? I'm not going to fight this dude. I am just going to run around this area, and every time we get kind of close, I'm going to poke at him. I'm going to burn some of his supplies. I'm going to have the Roman citizens burn their stuff and retreat into fortified cities, and we're just going to stay out here. And Hannibal is basically, while he's kind of messing around down here, he is basically just trying to get the Romans to fight him, because he knows his skill is in pitched battle, or maybe like pitched battle is the wrong word. His skill is in decisive open battle. And so he's basically just trying to get the Romans to fight him, and Fabius is just having none of it. So Fabius is just, working. He's basically keeping himself as a shield between Hannibal and Rome itself. But the Carthaginians are in no position to launch a siege on what would be it's a very, obviously a very large city, very well protected as far as walls and stuff like that. And, so one thing that we could kind of talk about is, if the Carthaginians had invested themselves into besieging Rome, they would have been fixed to Rome, which means that they then would have been vulnerable to attacks from, Roman armies, Roman legions that would have been coming from southern Italy, from Sicily, or that would have been coming in from, other places with, with Roman, troops and military elements still present. Because he would have fixed himself to the city. So obviously, Hannibal doesn't want to himself be fixed. He wants to fix the enemy and then have the freedom to maneuver on them. So Fabius is doing the Fabian strategy. He's doing all this stuff. He's not getting engaged in this. He's just picking and he's pecking and he's poking. And it works. The rest of 217, most of 216, nothing happens as far as really major battles. The Romans, they're kind of able to kind of catch their breath and everything. But, one thing that, like I saw one writer kind of write is that, is almost that like the Trebia and Lake Trasimene, they'd happened just long enough ago that people kind of had forgot. It kind of got a little too dim in their brain. So basically, it comes to year 216, and so Fabius basically does not get reelected as dictator. So with Fabius out, they kind of appoint two new consuls. So somebody by the name of Varro, somebody by the name of Aemilius Paulus, and basically these guys are like, listen, we need to go fight. We need to go fight Hannibal. So this is what Hannibal has been wanting. He's found the Romans, or he knows at least roughly where the mainstay of their force is. He has not been able to fix them for basically a whole year and then some. There's been some minor, somewhat minor, like battles and things like that, but nothing of the sort that, was the Trebia or Lake Trasimene or anything like that. And so again, Hannibal's strategy is basically, it's not to really defeat Rome, the city itself, and the government per se. It's basically to cause enough damage to the Roman military that they'll basically look weakened, and that the allies of the Romans and their kind of very recently assimilated territories will basically decide to come over to the Carthaginian side, so the Carthaginians can kind of be like, hey, now we're sort of back to where you guys kind of have your empire, we kind of have our empire, we're kind of doing our thing, but you're not, more powerful than we are, and kind of starting to take an edge in the Mediterranean. That's kind of his whole idea versus actually, they don't want to put ladders up on the walls and try to actually conquer Rome itself. So it's 216. Paulus and Varro are like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go fuck up, Hannibal Barca in open battle, which is never worked out for anybody except Scipio Africanus. However, so they raised at the time what it was was either the single largest or one of the largest Roman armies that had ever been raised. So it was about 86,000 men total, and they're down here, and so they meet at a place called Cannae. So down here in southeastern Italy. Now, one, it's something to kind of keep in mind to just see the sheer distance that this had traversed over this time. So you're looking at, 300-400 miles, at least in just pure linear distance. So this is, and this is over the course of, almost 2 years now. And so, Paulus and Varro come down to Cannae. Famously at Cannae, they basically, find each other, and Hannibal Barca basically leads them into what is one of the single most lethal days in history. So he basically, through incredibly cunning, tactics, and through knowing his enemy very well, and through knowing his own troop strength and weakness very well, he basically sets up a battlefield, in which he lets the Roman strength play itself out, which the Roman strength at this time was very much, it was a lot more similar to the phalanx of, kind of the Greek order than what would become the, the manipular and then the legionary system that we kind of know in latter years. And so the Romans kind of set themselves up. So one thing we've known at the time is that the Roman military has always been basically, impossible or borderline impossible to defeat, just, nipple to nipple, them moving forward, you moving forward. Just their equipment, their organization and things, they're just set up to do that very well. So the Romans kind of basically doubled down on all this. They kind of set their battle lines up to be not, they cut the breadth down, but increase the depth. So the Carthaginians, whether completely intentionally or kind of a little bit of a, intentional and also just serendipitous, they basically let the Romans push into the center of their line. Center of the line begins, it's comprised of mostly Gauls and, Spaniards, Iberians, begins to give. The Romans, seeing the success, keep pushing. So as the center starts to give, it starts to suddenly be, where now their flanks start to be kind of exposed to the exterior lines and the flanks of the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians then have some of their Numidian cavalry, which at the time was some of the best in the world. Basically, they charge the Roman, they fight the Roman cavalry, come back, basically set up, seal the Romans in from behind, and then the Carthaginians just absolutely slaughter them. So they killed like 80,000 that day. It was something like 70,000 killed, 10,000 were were like wounded, captured, and 3,000 of those were killed. The casualty numbers are a little bit kind of difficult to read. But basically, it looks like 80,000 is basically, 70,000 dead outright is a good estimate, and 80,000 casualties of 86,000. And it's basically numbers that you essentially you can't actually like comprehend that, because you're talking about having to kill all these people with basically bladed weapons and impact weapons. And so there's stories, and this I could actually I can very vividly like picture in my head. So there's stories of the Romans being so tightly packed that guys couldn't even raise their arms, which to me makes perfect sense, because it sounds exactly like what concerts sound like. So guys who've been to concerts, is like you kind of get in the middle of the crowd there, and this will happen to it's, well, granted, okay, if you go to like rock concerts or something, so it's fairly upbeat and energetic, but you kind of raise your hands up to cheer and things like that, and the crowd will get kind of pushed against you, and you can't get your arms back down. Or same thing, you have your arms down at your side, and you want to raise them up, and you kind of, are unable. You have to like sort of turn yourself or whatever. You kind of have to learn to sort of go with the crowd, like ebb and flow. And so that's basically what I imagine this being, is essentially once they got so tightly packed in there, one, most of the troops couldn't actually do any fighting because they're stuck behind other guys, and they're kind of cramped in. So basically the Carthaginians, or the Carthaginian army is basically just slaughtering them, kind of little by little. There's stories of Romans like digging holes and burying their heads under the dirt to suffocate themselves to death, because it took hours for the Carthaginians to basically kill them all. And instead of like basically slowly suffocating in the summer heat, they decided to just suffocate themselves like very quickly. So this happens, so August of 216, absolutely slaughter them. So the Romans go, hey, you know what? Actually kind of think that Fabius dude might have been on to something. So in 215, they basically they elect Fabius again. And so then Fabius goes full Fabian strategy and executes this for just years and years and years. And so the Carthaginians basically stay down here all the way until Hannibal is recalled to back to Carthage, which is in 204. So you're talking, over a decade. The Romans did kind of abandon the Fabian strategy in 207. So Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal landed with basically crossed the Alps with a large army. The Romans were able to kind of trick the Carthaginians into making them think that they'd kept their whole force down here. They marched some of their force up to assist, and then they utterly defeated Hasdrubal's force and killed Hasdrubal, up in the north of Italy there. But so this entire time, so we talk about from the crossing of the Alps down to here. I mean, that's probably, I don't know, what's that, 500 miles, 500 miles, something like that. But if we kind of think about it in terms of, from Lake Trasimene to Cannae in 216 and then to 204, Hannibal basically occupied, a third of the Italian peninsula there, and was never more than 100 or a couple hundred miles from Rome, but never really committed to actually trying to attack Rome, was never really part of his strategy, kind of worked on Sicily and other places and things like that. But that entire time, Fabius, executed his strategy of basically he was kind of working as a shield. So, they would let the Carthaginians move up the coastal roads and things, on either side of the peninsula, which was fine. Basically keep himself as a shield between them and Rome, but also basically keep himself like a set of interior lines. So if you kind of imagine if you're Fabius and you more or less have yourself a perimeter that kind of looks like that, well, now you're able to move yourself across the Apennines, working yourself, from one side to the other. So, if the Carthaginians are on the Adriatic coast over here, you're able to deal with them. If they're over here, on the coast of the Tyrrhenian Sea or anything like that, you're able to deal with them over there. And obviously it worked. It took time. It remained unpopular, but the Romans kind of got it. And again, it took a decade for this to fully work until finally, the Romans themselves attacked Carthage itself. So famously Scipio Africanus, at the time he wasn't Africanus, but so Scipio lands and marches on, Carthage itself. And so Hannibal's recalled in 204. Then in 202, they have the absolutely decisive Battle of Zama, the plain of Zama outside of Carthage when Hannibal's defeated there. But so I think that's just it's a very good example of it working both for and against people when we kind of talk about the basics of finding, fixing, flanking, finishing. Here is multiple times, numerous times throughout this. Hannibal was able to find an enemy. And when I say find, I don't just mean like, oh, hey, there's some Romans over there. When we're talking about find, particularly in the large-scale military sense, we're talking about finding the mainstay of the enemy's formation. Because obviously they're going to have cavalry out, they're going to have skirmishers and people out foraging and doing other such things out there. But okay, where is their camp? Where are most of their dudes? Where's their commander? That sort of stuff. That's what we're trying to find. So multiple times he was able to find them. He was able to fix them multiple times, particularly Trebia, Trasimene, Cannae. In other smaller battles, he was, pretty much any time that they met Hannibal on the battlefield, he was successful. But then enter Fabius Maximus and the Fabian strategy. And so he basically, he allowed himself to be somewhat found. He was able to, kind of confuse the Carthaginians as to where the bulk of the mainstay of his force was a few particular times, but essentially never allowed himself to be fixed. And because he was never allowed himself to be fixed, then Hannibal, who is a master tactician and a master of maneuvering, was never able to flank and finish the way that he was numerous other Roman generals throughout the time. And so again, we can apply, kind of this basic concept to pretty much, every single battle in some way. But, I think the Second Punic War campaigns in Italy are a very good example of it kind of working both for and against both sides at varying times of that. And also sort of a good example of, it's one thing to know like, oh, hey, I'm going to do a double envelopment at Cannae or whatever it happens to be. But it's like, okay, there are years and months, and in some, from Cannae until he withdraws from the peninsula, decades. So some of these things, they take a very long time, a very long distance to kind of set up. But I think that's a good ending point for this video. And like I said, I'll kind of work my way through putting some of these out as we go. But remember, guys, only the hits count, and you can never miss fast enough to catch back up.